Stephanie. Welcome to the What Fills Your Cup podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited because you are my first female guest.
Wow, I feel honored.
You're in the hot seat now, so this will be very exciting. To start off, what are we drinking today?
We have a chai tea latte from Starbucks, one of my personal favorites.
Cheers. Every episode, I like to give the guest the space to introduce themselves, maybe talk about some of your hobbies, what you like to do outside of work. That's a big topic on today's discussion, but I would love to know what makes Stephanie Stephanie.
Okay, so my name is Stephanie. I run a counseling clinic called Virtual Connect across Canada. I am also a clinician in the clinic. And then what do I like to do outside of that? I love spending time with people. So I definitely would call myself an extrovert. Love being around friends, love doing activities outside. I love to enjoy all of the nature that Vancouver has to offer. Very much so love skiing, going on camping trips, little adventures and that kind of stuff. So that's definitely what fills my cup.
I love that. So have you been to Whistler yet?
I have, yes.
Okay.
Yes, love that mountain. First place I came to out west and I absolutely fell in love with it.
Yes, so you're from Toronto.
Originally, yes.
Yeah. What made you want to move from Toronto to BC? Was it the nature?
So I'd always planned on living out west at some point. For a year was the plan. It's been 5. I started school doing a master's degree online and I just decided my partner at the time was going to UBCO and I was like, you know what, this is it. I can't really afford rent in Toronto right now. And so my first stop was Kelowna and then I've just slowly moved around and now I'm in Vancouver.
I was driving down Kitsilano Beach the other day and looking at the city with the mountains in the back. Even though I grew up here, I'm sometimes just like, wow, why do I ever leave? Like, we live in such a beautiful place. So I'm excited for you and happy for you that you have found that happiness over on the West Coast. Yeah. I love Toronto. It's fun for girls' weekends. Yes. I always say, if I want to party, I'm going to go to Toronto. Concrete jungle is what I'd like to call it.
It certainly is.
So you just touched on your schooling, and I would love to know, as you are a therapist, what was your first introduction to therapy? Was it by attending therapy yourself, or have you always known that this career was something that you wanted to pursue?
Interesting question. So I did go to counseling when I was a kid. My parents went through a separation, and at that point, I did see a counselor, so I was exposed to it. But honestly, I feel like I'm one of those really weird people who I just always knew that I wanted to be a counselor from like a very, very young age. And so, yeah, it's just always been one of those things. I feel like that's not very common, but for me, yeah, I always knew.
I love that it's something that you have always wanted to do. And I think that's very unique and different, but also it's helping others. You're serving others in the most beautiful possible way. So thank you so much. For those that don't know, I want to know what the schooling process is like into becoming a therapist.
This is a very interesting question. Full disclosure, actually, in certain provinces in Canada, counseling is not a regulated profession. Most people don't know this. So, because we're in British Columbia, I'll speak to British Columbia. It is not a regulated profession. So you actually don't need any schooling to call yourself a counselor. With that being said, if you want to be registered with the British Columbia Association of Clinical Counselors or the Canadian Counseling Psychotherapy Association, you do need schooling. Also, those are the kind of bodies that you can submit to your benefits. So for myself, I did a bachelor's degree. I did an honors double major in criminology and psychology. And then I went on to do a master's in clinical counseling and then got registered through that body, which also requires like a lot of supervision hours, a lot of direct client work, and also somebody like observing your sessions. But I always like to let people know when they're going into counseling that it is not a regulated profession. So be really mindful of who you're connecting with and who you're working with. At least at our clinic, we make sure that everybody has a master's degree and has that training. Because to your point, it's people trusting you with their mental health and some very sensitive topics, and knowing kind of the tools and ways to work with that and deal with that, I think, is really important.
That is really interesting. I had no idea that it wasn't registered. It's not registered. That's crazy to start. And I think I love that you shine light on the fact, be aware and maybe do your research into who you're talking to. What are you disclosing and who are you disclosing it to? I think that's very important. And also making sure you're opening up to someone that caters to your needs.
Yeah.
Because someone that maybe is going through a more difficult period of time mental health wise, they're not going to go to someone that specializes in physiotherapy.
Yes.
You know, like you got to make sure that what you're going through is aligned with the person that's trying to give you advice. So that is really, really interesting. But through your master's program, was there anything that you learned that the average person may be surprised by? So, for example, how to read body language or rerouting certain conversations to allow the client to get back on track or using specific words to help people open up?
I would say all of the above, but I think a couple things that like stood out to me that I think would be like interesting for other people to hear is kind of your own body language is really important, and kind of that opened approach. People are more likely to open up if you come from that space. Now, with that being said, that can be very much so done with like facial expressions, where you look, because our clinic is entirely virtual, so it's all done over Zoom. I think people are shocked how much of a close connection you can make just via Zoom. The other thing is silence, and how helpful it can be and how uncomfortable it can be. And that was something that I had learned in school, is kind of leaving space for silence and letting people kind of process on their own and figure things out. And I always say, you are the expert in your own life. I'm not the expert of your life. You are. And so, yeah, that's I feel like a couple things.
I love that you just talked about Zoom and virtual connect, because that's your business, which I absolutely love. We will make sure we throw in the link and talk about that a little bit afterwards. But I think a lot of people, if their session is over Zoom, they might feel as though they're not getting that personal connection. So I love that you've provided a space where it's like, no, we're providing that personal connection, and it's also in the comfort of your own home or wherever you choose to take. I probably wouldn't do my therapy session in a coffee shop, but to each their own. Like, if that's what you want to do. For many people, they avoid therapy not only because it's expensive, but also because it enables someone to confront internal issues they may be afraid to open or discuss. There is nothing wrong with leaning on your friends for support or advice, but how do you, personally, view attending therapy opposed to talking about internal battles with your friends?
So I think this is like a twofold question here. And so I'll start with the like fear or concern. And obviously I've been in situations where I've had lots of clients who it was their first time ever attending counseling, and it was like, oh yeah, somebody told me I should try this. I don't know what it's like. I don't know what to expect. And that like nerves and fear. And I always tell people, like, I'm not that scary, I promise.
You're not at all, don't worry.
And the other side of it is also, I don't know your life. I don't know what's gone on. And so I think there's this like old fashioned, like almost Freudian image of like you lay on the couch and someone's sitting there analyzing everything you're saying. And that's the furthest thing from the reality. A big piece of it is, I only know what you tell me. And there's a lot of steps before you actually talk about an event, especially if it's intimidating. Because again, you are the driver of your own life. You are the driver of all of our counseling appointments. You are the expert in your own life. And if something doesn't feel right talking about it, then we won't, right? Sometimes it's helpful to develop like tools and coping strategies first. Talk about like, how is this actually showing up in my life every day? And how do I deal with this? And then kind of go into like, okay, how has this impacted my life, and how does this kind of affect me, and what does it mean to me, right? Because speaking specifically about trauma, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't talk about or don't think about is like, okay, so how did this impact who you are today? And while it's typically negative experiences when we're talking about trauma, it still has an impact on who you are. And I think that is an important piece. So circling back, you're in charge. You're the one who gets to decide what we talk about. The second part to your question, I love it when people say, my counselor gives me advice, or you give me the best advice. I hear this all the time. I never give people advice. Not once. Because again, I'm not in charge of your life. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to tell you what to do, because what if it backfires? We're going to work through situations. We're going to talk about tools. We're going to explore options, maybe deal with like outcomes. If I do this, then like these are the possibilities. I often say when people are having a hard time or trying to make a decision about something, kind of come up with the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely. And then how would I deal with that? I find that really helps with anxiety, to approach things in that regard. Friends are great for venting. Friends are great for listening. Friends are great for talking about things. But friends are biased. They have opinions more often than not. They care a lot about you. Yeah. They're going to give you their opinions. They're going to give you their advice from typically like best intentions, but they have the intention of like what they think is best for your life and not necessarily what you want to do. And so I think that counseling, and like I said, I do hear this often, like, oh, you give the best advice. And I'm like, I've never given you advice. This is you. I've just helped you come to it. And so I think that's where counseling can be a lot different than friends, because of the development of tools and because of you're able to process and work through things. And then you're also able to like determine, okay, like what are the next steps that I want to take, what fits for me and what feels right. So yeah.
That was an amazing answer to start. Thank you so much. Therapy, when you walk in, isn't going to be, okay, so tell me your entire life story. And we're going to start from the beginning. It is not something that anyone, for that matter, should think that they're going in blindsided, because at the end of the day, what you just said, you're the one directing that conversation and leading that conversation. I find it interesting with my therapist. I even have periods of time where I've been with her for about 8 years and we're still figuring new things out and different roots of certain things, or maybe this connects to that, or have you thought about this connecting to this? And it does take a long time. It's not a one and done session or process. No. Some people think therapy might be a quick fix where I'm going to get that advice.
Yes.
Like you just said, it's not advice, it's working through and understanding coping mechanisms, how we can move forward, how we can learn about ourselves. So I really appreciate that answer. That was really beautifully said on your part.
Oh, thank you.
And in terms of friendships, I think that you're completely right in the sense of they have your best interest at heart. They also aren't going to tell you something that might hurt your feelings. And I think that can also be a part, or they might be so brutally honest that it does hurt your feelings. And maybe it wasn't the answer that you wanted, or maybe it was the hard truth that you aren't ready to hear. And I think that friendships are a great place to vent, but in terms of understanding internal battles and things that you are facing on a daily basis, I think that's where a professional can step in and really help you. But also having a good support system behind you is so very important. So I really, really, really loved your answer.
Yeah, I think both are really important.
Yes. So given that this podcast is based upon men's mental health, speaking in a partner's perspective, as a woman, what are some tools you'd advise to help get your partner to open up if they seem more reserved when discussing their mental health?
Ooh, this is a good one. I think that's a tricky one because it is situationally, but I think the biggest thing, people don't talk to listen, they talk to hear themselves. And I think when we come from a place of like speaking to hear the other person and to actually hear what they're saying, when you respond to someone, there should be like a couple second break, because you're not thinking about, okay, what am I going to respond to this? But rather I've listened to you, and opening that space and kind of going back to what I said earlier about like the silence, giving that space, giving that time, those check-ins, like, how are you feeling today? We're very quick to talk about events, I find, and go through like, oh, this is what I did, this is what I did, this is what I did. Okay, so how did that make you feel?
Going back to the silence and not maybe reacting super quick. So I think it also is very situational, but it comes down to, I would argue, healthy communication and how that looks in your relationship. And I think providing that space and silence, as mentioned, is really, really important. And also listening and hearing, what do you have to say? And how can we move forward as a team and not individuals in this partnership? When you are in an emotional state, the last thing you need is more noise. Sometimes you just need to pause, breathe, and regroup when the time is right.
Yeah, and I think you made me think of a really helpful analogy that I will often bring up with like couples or individuals, and that is when you're in a partnership, we don't want to attack or fight the person, we're fighting the problem. And when we start to like look at things external to us, like let's say I really don't like rainy days, instead of fighting each other about that, like, well, I do and you don't, okay, how are we gonna fight this problem? Like, how can we work on this together? Because this is our issue external to us instead of fighting the other person. And that can be really helpful in like couples counseling, and also obviously individually, like, okay, how do we improve our relationship?
Exactly. So, and I think that's also a very good point of people can be quick to think of all the negatives instead of, okay, can this be fixed? And I think that not jumping to conclusions is also really important. And also, you are a partnership. If you're choosing to have that person in your life, you're a team. You're not two separate people going through life. You have to also compromise.
Yes. 100%.
Compromising is very important as well. And you may not agree with it.
Yep.
But I'm sure there's things that I might do that my partner is compromising for. So, I mean, I did convert our second bedroom into my studio. I'm like, it's mine, right? And he's like, okay. But again, compromise.
Yeah.
And that's just a silly, funny example. But in a relationship, there does come a lot of compromise. So all your answers have been amazing thus far.
Thank you.
One of my final questions for you is, what steps can a partner, friend, or family member take to create a healthy line of communication when discussing mental health?
I think availability. Being there for a friend. If somebody's telling you they're going through a hard time, like calling or doing a check-in or seeing like, okay, how are you doing today? Simple connections with people go a lot further than I think a lot of people realize. That builds trust, that builds that relationship, and that builds that connection, right? And I think we would all hope that our friends would do that for us, right? If we know, yeah, things have been really rough recently, but I know that this person's checking up on me or this person's looking out for me. So I think really putting the time in, and it can be hard, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure everyone's had friends going through stuff that's really challenging, and for yourself to be available and to be there for people, it can be emotionally demanding, but it goes a long way. And especially if it's people you care about, I think that is a really important piece for kind of opening the door to have those like mental health conversations with people.
I always say check-ins are so very important. I think that also comes back to finding your community, and community being the people that you can trust and you can confide in when things are maybe not going as well as you had hoped or hoped for. Now, I have to ask,
okay,
do therapists need therapists?
Of course. And so this is a twofold question. I think there's your personal counselor that you would go to, like same as anyone else. But I think the flip side of that is there's something else that a lot of counselors access, which is called like clinical supervision. And that's support to essentially make sure that you are mentally okay to do this, and also to check in and see like, okay, this was a case that was really particularly challenging. Maybe have you tried using this approach or doing this approach with this client, and also a place to like debrief. So yes, but in two different capacities, I would say.
Just because you can provide that support doesn't mean that you don't need that support yourself.
And it's different, right? Like it's a different perspective of like, when you're talking to someone who's unbiased, and this kind of goes back to the whole friend thing, like unbiased, looking at things from entirely your perspective and an outside lens, people see things that maybe you wouldn't, right? And while, yes, I could kind of list off a bunch of tools or things that would be helpful to do and that side of things, I'm never going to get the outside lens or perspective that someone else might have.
I always say it's a third-party perspective. Sometimes your rose-colored lenses are on and they can just grab them, throw them on the ground and be like, no. Here's my unbiased, honestly, and I love that. And I always say, too, therapy doesn't have to be where every session you go in and you're talking about your childhood or your teenage years or your early adulthood, late adulthood. It doesn't have to be a specific time. It can also be a check-in for yourself of one, how are we doing? How are you feeling? Is your mental state all right? And if not, what can we do to help within the next few months? Therapy should also be something you go into with a very open mind and maybe throw away all those predetermined thoughts you might have about therapy.
Yeah, I like that you said that. And I just want to add, I find that people around like session 2 or 3 tends to be the hardest, because you're in this limbo of like getting used to it, but you don't really know each other super well. And so I always kind of tell people, try to like give it some time. If you kind of pull out at like this session 2 or session 3, maybe we've stunted the growth of like possibilities for future, right? And so that's just like one thing I'll add for anyone like starting counseling. That's just like my personal opinion, just seeing things that, yeah, second or third session can be a bit of like a tricky one.
And again, with that, trying to find that quick fix.
Yeah.
Of, oh, well, the first 2 sessions, I didn't really get what I wanted out of that. Well, that's 2 hours and you're 25. How can you fit your whole life in 2 hours? So I also think taking the time and also giving it a chance is a big thing, and not to give up so quick, because a part of it is you might be giving up on yourself a little in that case scenario, and you don't want to do that if things are already in a rocky state. So try to see the light, and I promise therapy is amazing, coming from someone that has actively been going for a very long time.
Yeah, and I always also like to say you're not going to practice a fire drill in the middle of a fire, because it's common misconception like, oh, I'm not going to go to counseling and like my mental health's fine. But why not develop some tools and skills so that when things maybe do get hard, because life happens, there's going to be shitty things that go on, you have something to kind of fall back on, and that support. And so that's another one.
Well, my final question for you is one that I ask every single one of my guests. And Stephanie, what is your favorite thing about yourself and why?
Oh, wow. I don't know how to answer this. That's an interesting one. I think my favorite thing about myself is that I don't have a problem getting along with people or getting to know people. And I'm a pretty social person, and so I think that I'd like to think people enjoy spending time with me. Obviously not everybody, that's not always the case, but I think that's probably one of my favorite things, and I really enjoy doing things for friends and being there for people. So
you're like, what do you mean you don't want to hang out with me?
Yeah, what?
No, I love that. You are very easy to be around.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Thank you. This is our first time meeting, and it feels like I've known you for longer than the time that we've been together. You're very welcoming, and I think especially as a therapist, that is a huge attribute that someone would probably need to have. But you are very easy to be around. You make conversation easy and comfortable. And I'm so excited that I've built a friendship today with you. So I really thank you. And I love that you love that about yourself. I actually haven't had anyone say that that's their favorite thing yet. So I really, really love that you love how social you are, outgoing, bubbly. I love it, and we need more people like that in this world, so thank you.
Well, thank you for being such an amazing host and making this so easy to go through all these questions, and for holding the space for me to kind of talk about counseling, and I hope it's been helpful for the listeners also.
Before I sign off, I would love for you to share a little bit about Virtual Connect, if you would.
Absolutely. So Virtual Connect is a cross-Canada counseling clinic. We offer counseling for people in a specialized way. I think you were mentioning this earlier. I'm a huge advocate in pairing people with who is best suited to what their needs are. So we have a variety of clinicians on the team who specialize in different areas, have different trainings. We offer workshops, family counseling, couples counseling, individual counseling, men's counseling, which I think is important. And the idea came to me from a friend who was reaching out saying they wanted to seek out counseling and didn't know where to start. And to me, being a therapist, being in this role, I was like, how do we not know where to start? And then I realized maybe it's not that simple. And so we have a little directory. You can put in what province you're from and then what you're looking for support with. And then the clinicians who offer that are available. You're also welcome to just fill out one of our contact pages, and then I will go through it and connect with you and see okay, who's best suited for you. We also offer free 15-minute consultations because that best fit thing is so important, and I really encourage people to use those consultations to get to know their counselor, to ask some questions like, what am I looking for in counseling? And are you able to offer that to me, right? I really recommend not giving up, trying somebody else, because maybe someone else is better suited. So
thank you so much, and I will have that linked for sure. And if you are someone that's looking for counseling or maybe starting your therapy counseling journey, then for sure check out Virtual Connect. Like I said, I will have it linked down below, so the option will be there if you are like, I could really use that right now. Scroll down and it will be right there. So I want to thank you again so very much for coming in today. It means so much to me, and I know that the viewers are gonna just fall in love with you as I have today. Before I sign off, if you haven't heard it today, I love you, and do not forget to tell someone you love them, because you never know who needs it a little extra. Bye, everyone.
Bye for now. Thank you very much for having me.